as an opposite state against Israel, right? So I don't understand.
No, Dr. Zhao, I think you'll have an opportunity, a soon opportunity to have this debate in person, I
Okay.
believe, in Beijing. But suffice to say that this is the first time I hear in public a, a Chinese personality speaking in such terms about October 7 events. And um, and I hope at least that when you listen to what Nitzan Horowitz said, and Nitzan Horowitz, I don't need to defend him, but let me put it this way: he's not from. He doesn't represent a right-wing position in Israel. I don't know exactly what his positions are today, because he's been out of government for a few year and a half. So, but last time I checked, he wasn't right-wing. You know.
No, I understand his feeling. I understand.
So, so it's interesting to see how strong a position he holds on this point, and also you hold also Ivan Sharshevsky speaking about China's strategic role in the region that is working against Israel's interests, and you know, these are not two individuals that are anti-China. You know, Nitzan was actually saying, speaking, I think, from actually, he doesn't need me to represent him, but he actually wants improved relations with China, not the other way around.
Yeah. No,
Right.
what I'm trying to say is that China's strategic aim in the Middle East is not try to intervene and divide, and to see that Israel has a more conflict with Iran. On the contrary, from last year, you can see that China is trying to be a mediator, trying to bring peace into the Middle East because that's in our interest. First, we try to bring peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and this time we try to bring Hamas and Fatah together. In both cases, we're not trying to prop up the opposition or the enemy of the Israel state. However, we're just trying to make sure we can find a political solution that ultimately could bring peace back to the land. Because in Chinese culture, we don't believe that the fighting is going to be the end of any story. There ought to be, just like Soviet, just like Russia and in Ukraine, there ought to be a political settlement. And in order to have that, the only role that China can play is trying to mediate between different parties and bring peace. So I don't know, yeah, why at this point Israel only seeing that somehow China is, wholeheartedly support Iran's cause in the Middle East. I don't think that's true.
All right. Point taken. Dr. Meena Singh Roy, you know, India also has a very unique position here on this relationship between Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran. You know, on one hand, it has cooled its relations with Iran over the past few years, but if I'm not mistaken, India has announced the day of mourning after the death of President Raisi. It has still its strong relations with Russia, has an issue with China, but how does it view this relationship in the Middle East? And what are India's objectives in this build-up?
Thank you so much for making me part of this conference. And I think when we look at any trilateral, quadrilateral, bilateral relationships, they are driven by, core interests of those countries. There are factors, responsible for bringing, these countries together. They could be geographical, they could be historical, they could be, economic and strategic, and also very situation-based sort of factors. Now, when we look at this triangle, I mean, why this triangle? What is driving this triangle, and how, India has adapted to the new opportunities and challenges which are unfolding in the region. Now, you cannot change the geography, you cannot change your long-term relationships, which are driven by your economic and strategic interests. And if you look at India's foreign policy approach in past 10 years and even before that, they have been driven by its core national interest, number one. Number two, there are certain red lines also when we talk about these relationships. Now, what does this triangle relationship mean for India? Basically, India has followed the approach of, economic development within its nation, and also any relationship which would help India regionally. Now, with that in mind, and particularly when we look at the Gulf region, I think India's strategic interests are very well placed out. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, but I think India has followed the bilateral relationships which are driven by its own national interest, and it has actually dehyphenated many relationships if you look at it. So there are negative impacts, there are positive impacts. So India has tried to adopt a policy which would contain the negative impact of such relationships, but at the same time build equations based on its national interest, and also based on what would be beneficial for the region, whether we are talking about the connectivity projects, whether we are talking about economic, trade, and security relations. India has 9 million plus people living in there. And as far as Iran and Russia are concerned, I think, India is very uniquely placed when it comes to it. It has, certain norms which it has followed in its foreign policy, and that is where is the core interest of India. It has very strong relationship with Israel. When it is supporting the Palestinian cause, it is not at the cost of its relationship with Israel. That is what it is. When it comes to, I really liked the word which was used in the previous session called strategic flexibility as compared to strategic autonomy. I think each country has to have that flexibility to operate with the region without, seeing to it those developments don't harm its own on economic and strategic developments. So I don't know if I have answered your questions, but I think I can always come back to it.
Don't worry, I will come back to you. Professor Adamski, now, you're not representing Russia, make no mistake, that's not why you be. But in your understanding, and to what extent is this triangle, some call it even quadruple, but this triangle with Beijing, with Tehran, essential, important for Russia today? How does this affect its engagement with Israel and in the Middle East? Or it doesn't, it's tied down in Ukraine and it doesn't really matter?
Oh, thank you. Tom Inkeris, first of all, thank you for having me. It's really a delight to be here. It's a terrific event, and I really appreciate it. I'll try to answer a question, Tommy. I'm not an expert on Iran. I'm not an expert on China. I'm even not an expert on Russian Chinese or Russian Iranian or Iranian Chinese relations. But I'm doing work on international security theory, I'm doing work on military innovations, I'm doing work on strategic culture, on Russia and Russian intellectual military history. So I will try to answer your question and also to reflect on the previous points from this position. I agree with Mr. Shershevsky. I think it would be not an accurate diagnosis to say that these countries are in some sort of alliance, or at least if you ask from the Russian position, the way how I'm reading Russia and how I can channel Russia to you, I wouldn't define it as an alliance.
A coalition?
That said, I think I can offer you a definition of certain common denominators that you can register in their self-perception and also in the way how they're perceived from outside. So let me give you just 3 illustrations of that. First of all, these are 3 countries, and again, now I'm talking as a scholar of international security. These are 3 countries that in the conventional wisdom today among practitioners of international relations are perceived as challengers of the status quo. And that what automatically sort of brings them together. China is perceived as a challenger of a status quo regionally and globally. The same is true about Iran, and the same is true about Russia. In their own self-perception, they are on the defensive mode. In their own self-perception, each of these countries actually perceives itself as reacting to another challenger. That they are defensive, they are reactive, they are counteroffensive, and that's what naturally brings them together. That's point number 1. Point number 2, I think our Chinese colleague mentioned it. When I'm trying to answer your question, Tommy, I'm seeking to situate this in much broader historical context. It's not only about this war or war of in Ukraine, it's just broader. So if we want to define, or if I can offer you a useful definition of the relationship between the 3 countries in the decades prior to this war, during this conflict, and in my hunch also in their next 10 years, probably the right definition would be their competition cooperation relationship. It's very dialectical. These countries are sharing certain common interests, and there are certain places where their interests go apart, and we can talk more specifically about it. And I think there are boundaries for this cooperation competition relationship. It's a very interesting kabuki dancing that they're all having with each other, primarily vis-a-vis the very same competitor, in most of the cases the United States. That's point number 2. Point number 3, they are all perceived quite often as one entity, as one strategic entity or one strategic alliance, especially right now. And this is why countries that are engaging them, or countries which are engaged in strategic interaction with them, like Israel, like the United States, like Ukraine, or any other countries in the European Union, they often operate vis-a-vis these countries while keeping in mind other 2 competitors. And I think this is also how these countries are, and Russia in particular, are relating to this region. For Russia, and this is the last point on Russia, sort of a long response to the question that you asked me, there are certain strategic principles that Russia, or that are driving Russian behavior in the region historically. They're trying to be an honest broker and equally engaged with all parts of the conflicts, a state that is equally engaged. They're trying to exploit regional tensions, and they want what they call to manage a strategy of controlled tensions, to make tensions high enough in order to preserve their place in the region, but not as high that they will be detrimental to the Russian interests. And they're also operating from the position of reasonable sufficiency. So they want their investments to be big enough or significant enough in order to promote their goals, but not as high as to produce overextension. So I think right now, relationship with Iran, with China, is pretty much going along lines these principles.
Before going back to our foreign speakers, and I'm not forgetting them, I would ask you both, since both of you actually worked in the defense establishment, advised on national strategy and national security, does this how would I say, evolving regional and global order, this closer relationship or coalition, a loose coalition or between Russia, China, and Iran. Does this affect the way Israel should be thinking about its national security concerns? Does it have to expand the horizons of its consideration? Because, we are used to dealing with Iran on a very regional basis, how we deal with Hezbollah or its Hamas. Does this global realignment, if you wish, have an effect on us and how we should be dealing with this?
Okay. Yes. Well, it's always correct, probably, but right now it's correct, especially since we are living in an era where two probably biggest post-Cold War wars are taking place. War here in the region. The second one is Russia-Ukrainian conflict and war, and they are very much interrelated. Although they are 1,000 kilometers apart, different geographies, but all the actors that were mentioned here, and we didn't mention Ukraine or European Union, but they're all very much interdependent, and every move that an actor is moving vis-a-vis another actor, by default, not even by design, have repercussions and implications for others. Also, if you're asking about Israel, even if these three countries, Russia, Iran, and China, are not allies, these countries are actually right now going through very significant military experiences. China is following very closely the way how Russia and Iran are engaged in two biggest campaigns of the post-Cold War, and we are all, people in this room, people elsewhere around the world, we live in the historical period when we are trying to diagnose and to figure out the next big thing in the character of war. We're going through a stage of significant military transformation and innovation worldwide. And these three countries are actually, if you wish, are community of learning or community of knowledge. Okay? So if the state of Israel is, to a certain extent, trying to make sense what is the world that it lives in, it's probably better off to keep in mind, to take into account the fact that it is engaged with countries that are going through, these three countries that are mentioned here, that are going through very significant and deep round of military innovations. And this is something to keep in mind.
Well,
For me, for me, it's not the reason, but it's encourage Israel to widen its strategic view, widen its strategic posture. We talked about before a middle power. So we understand from the conflict between Israel to Iran that the conflict in such, became in a size where Israel cannot fight it by itself. So the importance of alliance, the importance of coalition, the importance of new connection, this triangle help us to understand the importance of it, meaning let's go to the Gulf. Let's go, we talked about India before, right? Let's talk about, of course, United States and Europe, this is obvious. So the importance of understanding that this kind of conflict, it's no matter how we will define it and describe it, is much wider than we used to have in the past.
all right. Dr. Zhao, is this having this experience of the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, and the American response, military responses in the Middle East, the way we responded to the Iran attack of April 14, is that having an effect on Chinese calculus, strategies, be it in its neighborhood or beyond?
Let's talk about China, Iran, and Russia. There is no trilateral grouping among these three countries. The only thing that linked these three countries together, if you look at this directly, is from the US point of view. Because, considering recently they passed legislation that appropriate over $60 billion to support the warfare in Ukraine, in Israel, and also in the Indo-Pacific, particularly supporting Taiwan. And I think that's the thing, linking these three nations together. So if you say that this is some sort of resistance, yeah, they share some common characters. However, if you look at the mechanism among the three countries, there are almost none. And China's top international organization is UN, G20, BRICS countries, and then Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And that's the last one is the organization that includes all those three countries. However, the central point of Shanghai Cooperation Organization is Central Asia. So to say that somehow these three countries are working together, it's just not realistic. I mean, they have some strategic mutual supporting, particularly in building what China called a equal, ordered, multilateral world, and that's probably true. But I don't think to over-interpret the trilateral relationship is in the interest of Israel, because that's going to misunderstand China's strategic intention. And coming back to your question, I think at this point, it's very hard. This world is really chaotic. And for China, what we are thinking is how to bring peace back to the world, because this is bad for business. If you consider the trading volume, China's trading volume with Israel is bigger than Iran's, and China's trading volume with Saudi Arabia is 10 times bigger than Iran's. So who is the best friend of us? I think that's very clear. And moving along the Belt and Road Initiative, our best partner and customer is in Europe. So I think it's against China's interest to think about, China is playing against Israel or our friends in Europe. And I think it's precisely because the US is having a misperception of strategic intentions of China, they're adopting the wrong policy, but that's their problem. So for China, I think moving forward, we're going to persist on pursuing peace in the region and around the world. And that's for the best interest of China's future development.
All right, that's an interesting take. Dr. Meena Singh Roy, but we're talking here about the evolving world order and how it is affecting. Where do you see India's role in the Middle East, let's say in 10 years from now? Is it taking perhaps, now it's perceived as a friendly power, emerging, benign, but where will it be in 10 years? Might it not be also, will have some aspirations of hegemony, God forbid I say that word?
Sorry, I didn't get the last word of yours.
The word is hegemony. There's no hegemonic ambitions.
Right. Okay. Well, to answer your question on the future role of India in the Middle East, I think that would be driven on many factors. Number one, India is not, has ever been, seen as a hegemonic power. That is what it is. It's more as even if you look at the new elements of India's foreign policy discourse, which is in public and even otherwise, if you see the agreements, they are driven by, its multi-alignment approach, or what we call multi-victor foreign policy, with national interest and the global goods at its core, followed through its policy of Vasudev Kutumbakam, which means world is one family. Now, if you look at the G20 slogan also, it calls on one earth, one family, and one future. Right now, this is at the core of India's foreign policy discourse, number one. Number two, it is also very people-centric approach, when we look at foreign policy. Here, whether we are talking about Middle East, whether we are talking about its immediate neighbors, be it Afghanistan, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Turkey, and even I would go to the extent of Pakistan, where India has gone helping, in times of crisis, in the disaster which have happened. So focus, if you see, has also been on the cooperation, which are minilateral or a regional approach. That is what I would say when it comes to Middle East, or as we call West Asia and North Africa. But here I would like to say that Gulf is the priority for India, whether we're talking about the energy, whether we are talking about the trade, whether we are talking about security and defense, and whether we are talking about the infrastructure, communication. So these are the factors, and you see how India has developed particularly very, very strong strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, with Oman, and other Gulf partners. But this is not to deny the fact that the other countries, which are part of the Middle East, as we look at it, its policies have gone beyond these Gulf partners. It has built very strong bilateral cooperation with Morocco, with Egypt, with Tunisia, with Iraq. So this is what is at the core of India's Middle East policy, I would say. So in next 10 years, I foresee India's stronger bilateral and regional partnership, which will be developed, which is going to be based on strategic and economic interests. That is what I look at. And I also see Israel as one of the major pillars of cooperation when we are talking about the WANA region as such.
Thank you for that, Amina. Professor Adamski, is, 10 years ago, Russia was considered to be one of the most important powers in the Middle East. 9 years ago, getting the years right, it started its military involvement in Syria. A year before, it brokered the so-called chemical disarmament of Syria, and was very much involved with Saudi and the OPEC Plus arrangement. With the war in Ukraine, it seems that it has lost its regional involvement, but it still has turned Iran into sort of a close ally, a closer partner, because of its dependencies. But when students ask me, at least, I say to them, I should always caution them, because people in the West thought in the 1990s that Russia is finished, and then came back. Do you see Russia coming back to the Middle East, playing a more prominent role after Ukraine, however that ends, or doesn't?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I don't think that Russia is coming back for the very simple reason it never left. There is a famous saying attributed to Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck, that Russia is never as strong as it seems, but it's never as weak as it appears. So it's somewhere in between. And if we go to some conventional wisdoms or even CIA estimates during the last 30 years, given the demographic situation in Russia and given the economic situation in Russia, according to certain intelligence and also academic estimates, this country should have been disappeared at least 5 or 10 times, according to estimates.
Yeah.
If we go to this war in Ukraine, people were talking about Russian military effectiveness, specifically its capacity to mobilize, its capacity to sustain morale of the troops. And according to the estimates, Russian troops were supposed to surrender at least 10 times during these 3 years.
So to be honest, I also heard that Russia was supposed to take Ukraine in 3 weeks, so these balance them out. So
yes, people are getting each other wrong, no doubt. I'm just trying to register the reality. Russia got it wrong once. People in the West have been repeatedly getting wrong Russian military effectiveness. Now, the same to a certain extent applies to Russian-Iranian relationship and Russian. First of all, you're absolutely right. Russians are only human beings. They are not superhumans. They're right now engaged in the biggest military conflict of the modern history. So naturally, the attention span or the center of the attention is focused on Ukraine. However, they're still active enough elsewhere around the world, in this part of the world, in Africa and in Asia. Although, again, there is certain prioritization of targets. Now, speaking of Russian-Iranian relationship, again, you're very light and accurate, Tommy. During this war in Ukraine, really unprecedented episode in the relationship between the two countries occurred. Since the Soviet collapse, when these countries were on the mode of cooperation, there was the vector of reapproachment all the time, but there was a certain asymmetry between the countries. Iran was usually on the receiving end of the Russian assistance and not the other way around. And here, during the war, especially during the second year of the war, Russia, operating from the position of the specific vulnerability and the specific military capabilities, actually developed unprecedented dependence on Iran. And we had the window of very unique asymmetry when Russia was dependent on Iran, but I think this window pretty much has been closing during the last 6 or 7 months. So Russia basically reconstituted itself with regards to everything that relates to ballistic capabilities that it was receiving from Iran. There is still a cooperation between the two countries, but I think today is much more balanced, and this moment of dependency is much narrower today, or the level of dependency is much smaller. Still, you're absolutely right. There is a vector of cooperation between the two countries. This vector will gonna make, it's safe to assume that these countries will continue to cooperate, but all other principles of Russian conduct in the region, trying to be equally engaged with other countries, such as countries in the Sunni world, Israel, it will pretty much stay intact, because this is the way how Russia is generating benefits from its strategic presence in the region. Yeah. Just maybe one last thing, also going back, Yuval, to what you said about axis of resistance. It's very important, I think, as a scholar of strategic culture, to go and to see what terms the countries are using themselves in order to define their relationship. Okay, so in certain cases, there is axis of resistance. In Arabic, it's mukawama. This is resistance, but it's not necessarily the same notion of axis like axis of the Second World War, and this is usually the optics used in the West. But what puts all these three countries basically together, it's their desire to change the rules of the game in the world order and to terminate what they perceive as a unipolar moment of the United States worldwide and regionally, especially when it comes to their rules of the game and rules of engagement in international politics.
They still think that we're in a unipolar moment?
Well, they believe that, well, yes and no. It is not as strong as it used to be after the Third World War, which is the Cold War, but they still believe that they are in the mode of challenging the position of the United States as a global superpower. At least the logic of Russian war in Ukraine, the logic of this war in Ukraine is much broader than just fighting in Ukraine itself. It's just the first, at least that's the way how defense intellectuals and officials in Russia are perceiving it. That's an active military engagement that is challenging the international rules of the game and world order that was established primarily by the United States and its allies after the Third World War, which is a Cold War.
May just put this question.
Yeah.
One comment to this question. Something that both Russia and China hold a huge advantage on any other country, including the United States in the region, is their ability to talk to any player in the region. This is something Israel is missing because the United States cannot do it with all the players. And if we go backwards to the Syrian civil war, a few years ago you mentioned the chemical, we used this connection with Russia to influence things on the ground. So hopefully both Russia and China will be able to take this place in the future also for peace, and let's hope it will be.
So we have to round up because our time is coming up. But I want to ask, first of all, our foreign speakers, what role can their countries play right now in diffusing tensions in the Middle East? And brief answers, because we Israelis are really impatient. I apologize in advance. But brief, two, 3 sentences. What can your respective countries do to improve stability and peace in the Middle East? Dr. Zhao, perhaps with you?
Just before you answer your question, just very quick comment on these 3 countries grouping. Again, this is an external imposed perception. It's a bias because China has better relationship with Iraq, with Egypt, with all the areas, Middle Eastern countries. So I don't see that China-Iran relations is particularly above our relationship with all the other countries. And that related to your question, which is what can China play? And I think our colleague has said it perfectly, that China has a balanced relationship with all the parties. And in the future, just like in GCPOA, China can play a significant role in the background, trying to move information and exchanges back and forth, and particularly play as a host for potential political settlement and negotiations between the different parties. And therefore, it's critically important for Israel to maintain an open channel with China and good relations with China. And I think China is willing to play that role.
Thank you for that. Meena?
Yes, well, when it comes to India, I think India is a country which loves peace, which has been working for peace. And conflict in the region is definitely not in the interest of India. Given India's growing role when we talk about Global South, given India's role which it has increased in recent past when it comes to the Middle East, I think India would be willing to play a significant role to bring peace to the region, bilaterally as well as with the like-minded countries, to focus more on peace building rather than looking at geopolitical games and rivalries and competition. It is in the interest of also the triangle which has been talked about. I would rather call it the cooperation among the 3 countries, or the excess of convenience. There is always situation-based cooperation which comes up. You side with certain countries which is in your national interest, in your regional and global interest, depending on the priorities that a country would focus. When we look at India's relations with all 3 countries, I think with Iran, India has had good relations. With Russia, it has good relations. There aren't any problems. When we talk about China, India has been engaging China. Yes, there are problems when it comes to Sino-Pak axis, when it comes to the border issues. But I think there has been constant engagement with China. And when we talk about the Middle East, I think, all countries, all Asian major players, and I would include Japan and Korea also as a part of it. When we talk about the huge energy demands, each country, has stakes in the region to see it, conflict free. Now, but I also believe that, peace building is not an easy game when we are looking at a complex region like Middle East. So I think the first step would be to look within. And I think the kind of a conference or the kind of when I say conference, it could be a dialogue, to initiate at that level, which is driven by the regional players, supported by the major and the external partners. And I think the dialogue is the start point. But I would also add a caveat here that there is no place for the act of terrorist or act of terrorism, which we saw on the land of Israel which is highly condemnable, you know. And as far as India is
Yes.
concerned, I think there is no place for people who follow such heinous acts of terrorism. And I think I'll stop
Thank you,
here.
Mina. Thank you very much. To Israelis, to wrap up, one sentence. We live in GPC, Great Power Competition. One sentence. How does that now affect Israeli calculus? One sentence. No, it's not. It's one sentence. Dima?
I don't know.
All right, that's fair enough. No. Yuval?
We need another session.
Thank you very much. Elise?
I am actually thrilled to have the honor of sitting on the stage with Ambassador Ephraim Halevi. I know that he does not need any introduction, and I will just remind everyone he is the former head of the Mossad, former national security advisor, ambassador, was received accolades for his contribution to our relationship with Jordan, Israel, Jordan, and he is, no one really can fill his shoes, and we are so grateful to have you with us now and to share some of your thoughts on what you've heard today. What are you thinking with respect to China and Israel?
I want to thank you for inviting me, even at this late hour. And I want to compliment everybody who stayed on to listen to me as well. I'd like to begin by mentioning to you all that the second largest diplomatic mission that Israel has in the world is in China. It's the largest number of representations inside China. It's second only to the United States. And I think this is a reflection, a very wise reflection on the part of Israel and those who undertook this effort to maintain this relationship, that we have to look at things in a more balanced fashion. I've been sitting here for over an hour at the back. I sensed a note of gloom, of concern, of people who are worried about the future. And I've not just come here to give you a message of, shall we say, of joy concerning the situation at the moment, but only to say that we have been in worse situations in the past, and I'm sure that we will be able to get out of the present morass that we are in, both domestically and strategically, as a result of the events of the last 200 odd days. I also would like to say that I believe that the Chinese have been very, very circumspect in the way they have commented on the situation here and the war which broke out. And although on the face of it, it looked as if they were immediately allied with our enemies, I don't think that in practical terms this had any result in the field. I don't think that China supported the Hamas in any way, practically speaking. They did in the past, but I don't think that this is the case, the current case, or the case in the last 10, 20 years. I think we also have to take into account that China has an approach which is a long-term approach concerning history. And probably the most ancient history there is in the world of not only science and technology, but also in the art of war. I remind you that Sun Tzu, even to this day, is a very, very important source of study in West Point. An American general translated the Sun Tzu book on strategy from Chinese into English. That this translation was given to me as a present when I finished my service in the United States as Mossad, the station chief, for 4 years. A 4-star general in the United States, in a departing gesture, gave me the book of Sun Tzu. So I think we have to be a little more, shall we say, stable in the way we approach what is happening around us today. We're going through a difficult period, a period in which we have serious internal problems. We were facing a constitutional crisis months before the war broke out, and I think that our enemies in the south were following this very, very carefully and chose the right moment from their point of view to carry out the operation that they were intending to mount against Israel. To the best of my knowledge, I think the ultimate target of the Hamas when they began this campaign was not to end the fighting the way it is today. As far as I know from sources which I've gathered, the ultimate intention was, after the initial assault, to go south, to capture Beersheba, and then go even further south and even get to as far as Eilat, and then from a platform, which would be a very large platform, to turn northwards, and if possible in the end, to bring about the end of the State of Israel. I think that was the plan in not every detail, but that was the concept. And we have to be clear in our minds that this has not been achieved and will never be achieved. Will Asia play a role in this conflict in a serious manner? I doubt. I doubt if this will happen. I doubt if Asian powers will become involved directly in what is happening here. I doubt if Saudi Arabia, with which we have a dialogue for quite some time, and Saudi Arabia is a very, very important player in the world here, and also, by the way, has very, very wide relationships with China. I think that China is not interested to be a player in the Israeli-Arab conflict. That is my view.
Can I just ask, how do you interpret China's effort to bring together Fatah and Hamas to join them in one unit?
I think, first of all, they failed. I think it is a sign of their lack of real information and real analysis of the situation in the Palestinian world. The fact of the matter is that it was not possible to bring Fatah and Hamas together, and they will never be together. And the idea that they had to bring them together was maybe a theoretical idea of looking at the map. But in practical terms, this was not possible ever. And generally speaking, the Chinese have been very, very circumspect in this manner, and have sought mainly in their relationship with Israel to gain from Israel and study from Israel, and to be able to take what Israel has to offer in science, technology, and many other areas, how to gain something more for China internally. 10 years ago or so, a big Chinese delegation came to Israel, led by a Chinese general, and they approached the Institute for Special Studies at the Hebrew University, led by a very renowned physicist, who is now the president of CERN, which is the European nuclear reactor in Switzerland. And the reason they came was to find out how is it possible to get as many Nobel Prizes as possible. What is the methodology that Israel employed in order to have such a large number, relatively speaking, of Nobel Prize winners in comparison with any other country of our size? Well, I don't think they were able to get a satisfactory reply, not because we had any hidden secret here, but because I don't think there is a reply. It was simply a fact that it happened to be that we had a number of people who were very prominent in their fields, both men and women, by the way. And it's also true that Israel has a disproportionate number of Nobel prizes. But this was the kind of approach that China then had, and I think even to this day, China is not only interested in being involved economically and otherwise here in Israel, but it's also interested all the time in trying to get as much as it can out of Israel and Israel science and technology the way it is today.
Can I ask, how would you recommend, given the current situation regionally and globally, given the U.S.-China rivalry and China's growing role in many different regions of the world and technologies, and its success in its promotion of electric vehicles, contributing on the one hand to climate change, and on the other hand becoming a concern for Europe and the U.S. Because they have been maybe too successful in that area. So here in our corner of the world, how should we be dealing with China in this current context?
I think that Israeli government policy on China is these days characterized by the absence of any thoughts given to what you've asked. For obvious reasons, the powers that be in this country are concentrated on how to gain war in the south, a target which has not yet been achieved, and in my opinion has a growing possibility of there being the end of a war with no winner either side. I don't want to say of both sides losing the war, but I don't think that we're going to end the war of this current war with having one winner or one loser. I don't think so, the way it is now. And I don't think this will fundamentally change in the weeks and months to come, as long as the current war continues. But I do think that due to the fact that everybody in government who has any weight or anything is involved in the war and how the war can be brought to a positive end, there are very few people who devote much thought to the fact that suddenly we're going to have an influx of cars from China, which will within a year or so mean that 50% of the cars in Israel will be Chinese. This is a mark of lack of governmental decision making in Israel. And it's not the only area in which the part of the damage done to Israel, its economy and so forth, is because of the fact that people don't have the power and don't have the position and don't have the authority to bring about even a minimal economic policy on basic problems of the Israeli economy. And I think that the Chinese, not because of hating Israel or so anything like that, but they are taking advantage of the situation here. And they've done that very wisely. I'm not complaining about this. I'm saying that's a fact. We have to recognize this. But unfortunately, in Israel, at this particular point in time, there is no governmental office or no governmental authority who will sit down for 5 minutes and discuss or think about where and how China is conducting its interests in Israel today.
I am afraid I have to agree with you on that. But actually, we've found that that's been the case for years. I mean, there is a government department that works very well in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's not a wide enough effort to be able to achieve the goals you're outlining. But if you had an opportunity to speak to someone in government who perhaps later, a bit later when focus can be readjusted, and give them some insights and suggestions, what would they be regarding China?
I think there are areas which we have to be very careful about in terms of the health of this country and the health of the citizens of this country. China has a very growing role in a long list of companies that provide medical services to the population, not the major sick funds and so forth, but many, many other types of supplemental services to various areas of, for instance, treating people at their homes and so forth. All the companies which are involved in this, of giving services, are now owned by the Chinese. That also means to say that the health conditions of people who accept these services, who in many cases are senior people in Israel society, there is a wealth of information about their health and many other things concerning this. And there is no consideration about this of importance, and this is something which has to be looked at. But I have not found anybody who has 2 minutes to listen to this, and that is the way things are. It's one of the problems we have at the moment in Israel, that even matters of priority, like, for instance, how to deal with the problem in the north, how to deal with the fact that the people in the north have not, for months upon months, have not received any real attention. And the Prime Minister came up there for a few hours and spent time there and left them just as he had left them 4 months previously when he talked to them with nothing in hand. So we have to take this into consideration and to know that those forces, not only China, I think maybe others, who want to cash in on the situation that Israel is in, China has been very, very say active, not in a sense of a hostile approach, but an approach which serves Chinese interests.
If I may, I'd like to switch gears a bit and ask you maybe you heard a bit about our Global Israel Initiative, focusing on Israel as a middle power on the world stage and cultivating ties with Indo-Pacific countries. You've been around and in positions of significance in this country for decades. From your perspective, what are your thoughts on the potential for Israel in the Indo-Pacific?
I think the Pacific has a bigger potential for Israeli exports in many, many fields. I think that Israel has a lot of potential in providing technology and in a large number of areas. Israel has been very active in key countries in Southeast Asia, for instance in Indonesia, with whom we don't have diplomatic relations. But yet, yes. But Israelis travel to Indonesia, and Indonesia is a very large player in Southeast Asia. I'm sure you accept this. And I think that there is an enormous area here where we could really contribute, first of all, to the interests of people in Southeast Asia, and on the other hand, to contribute to our being a country with which we can be dealt with without having Israel having an interest in the internal affairs of those countries. One of the things that Israel was perfecting over the years was that we gave a variety of support in very many areas to countries in Southeast Asia who knew that if we gave them this support, this would not result in the fact that these countries would not only not be beholden to us, but also would be dependent on us. No Southeast Asia country is dependent on Israel, but many, many Southeast Asian countries are countries which have received key support in key issues. And we have given this support with an open heart, and we have, in certain cases, also developed very important relationships with them. For instance, like a country called Singapore, which on the face of the earth, if you look at it, you need a magnifying glass to find out where Singapore is. But Singapore is a country where we have been very active over very, very many years, and we have not, as a result of that, become part of the government of Singapore and telling them what to do in their political and internal affairs. And I think from this point of view, Israel still has a potential in placing its capabilities to the service of countries like that, including, by the way, China in certain key areas in which we have been useful to them.
One area that I've been told is relevant for the Indo-Pacific, for Israel, which relates to our national security, is defense development. That because there is a growing need for defense material, and there is an advanced human resources pool in the Indo-Pacific, it is not intrinsically anti-Semitic, and that combination creates an atmosphere for the potential for R&D in military defense and for production and manufacturing. What's your view of that?
I think we have to take into account, in this respect, the global scene. We have to take into our consideration the interests of the United States. We are still, from our economic and certainly from our defense aspects, have a very important relationship with the United States, which is second to none in every aspect. But this has also comes with a proviso that we do not do things which cause damage to the policies of the United States. And in the past, we have had several very, very serious crises with the United States over what we have been doing with China. And in each of these cases, we have paid a very, very painful prices for what we have done, and we had to carry out a series of steps which were demanded of us by the United States, which had relationship to China. And very often in recent years, Americans who used to come here, as the Secretary of State used to come here, didn't only deal with Israel's requirements for equipment and so forth, but it also dealt with problems like what's happening in the Haifa port, and why is in Haifa there are Chinese activities adjacent to the ports. These are things which we have to take into account, and for which we have paid a price. By the way, first and foremost, who pushed the relationship with China to beyond the desired, shall we say, points where we should not be necessarily in league with China, was the incumbent Prime Minister of Israel.
My final question. The title of this conference is China's Rise and the Global Israel Initiative. How do you see China's rise going forward in general, and to what extent do you see its rise impacting Israel in the Middle East?
I've had the opportunity from time to time to speak to Chinese figures of one kind or another, and I believe that they are very conscious of the reservations we sometimes have as to which subjects and how to attach them, how to deal with them. I think they understand. China has enormous patience, and that's part of the secret of its long, long history. And I think that we have to try and learn from them something about patience. And we have to be patient with the Chinese in some of the things they've been saying and doing. I think that what they did to bring about the renewal of relationships between Iran and Saudi Arabia was a positive move, even from our point of view. Because from our point of view, given the way the Saudis have their relationships with us, the fact that Iran renewed relations with Saudi Arabia under the auspices of the Chinese meant to say, if you look at it in a proper, serious manner, this could be of great benefit to Israel if ultimately the Saudis enter into a open, serious relationship with Israel. So we have to be a little more circumspect, the way we speak, the way we jump to conclusions, the way we suddenly get excited. For instance, the Chinese-Iranian relationship, there is a defense relationship between them. There is an intelligence relationship with them. If you ask me, has the result of this affected Israel in terms of what they've been doing together on the area of intelligence cooperation? I think not. I don't think that the Chinese are providing the Iranians, or the Iranians are providing the Chinese serious information, or are trying together to work out operational activities against Israel. I don't think this is the case. And we have to be a little more mature. Good question, a good word.
Good word.
Yeah, a good word. We have to be a little more mature. And the more mature we will be, the happier we'll ultimately be as well. And I think that on this happy note, it is important to conclude this meeting, because I want to congratulate you on having this conference. I want to thank you very much for inviting me. I met a lot of people outside before I came in, and you have brought together a lot of young people here who I've never met before. I even met somebody who turned out to be a cousin of mine, and yes, and he and I attended our aunt's 100th birthday several years ago, and I spoke there, and he told me what I said there. So, and I never met him. So, thank you very much for bringing together me and my
Cousin.
my new cousin. But who's that over there? It's
Cousin.
you. Yeah. It's
The
me.
cousin.
So, as you see, I have a relative in the audience who gives me courage to go on. But time is over, and even the stock exchange is probably no longer issuing its dire daily reports. And we're now on Thursday, and tomorrow is Friday, Erev Shabbat. So let us end this meeting with saying Shabbat Shalom, and let us hope that all of us will, shall we say, emerge happier at the next meeting that I'm sure you will have.
And I have nothing more to add except thank you from the bottom of my heart, and Signal Group thanks you, and we thank all of you, and we look forward to seeing you, Bezrat Hashem, next year. Shabbat Shalom.